Calling the meeting to order on October 16th, 2025. Shall we start with roll call?
Chair Hamilton, Vice Chair Schulte,
Here.
Commissioner Brunda. Here. Commissioner Briles.
Here.
Commissioner Hutton.
Present.
Commissioner Neff.
Here.
Commissioner O.
Here.
Can we get approval of the meeting minutes for September 18th, 2025? Is there any discussion or changes?
I motion to approve the minutes.
Second,
I'll second.
all in favor? Aye.
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 Minutes are approved. So next on our agenda is the 2025 planned area development update. So we're going to have a public hearing on this, and I believe we start with the review from the city.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair. So yeah, today we'll be reviewing the planned area development update. We're going to go over an overview and some proposed amendments and the staff recommendation. So first up, what is a planned area development? Planned area development is a alternative form of development which allows for more flexible method of developing land. Planned area developments are allowed to modify certain zoning requirements such as setbacks and lot size in the interest of certain goals such as retaining vegetation or reducing impervious surfaces. In the Mill Creek Municipal Code, it's found in Chapter 1612 and includes regulations such as the applicability for PRDs, planned residential developments, and planned commercial industrial developments, minimum sizes, permitted zoning modifications, and permitted density. So why is an update needed? As development has shifted from expansion to infill as Mill Creek has matured as a city, when Mill Creek was when Mill Creek was a young city that was focused on expansion, growing outwards in greenfield development. But as it's matured, the borders have stopped expanding, and it's focused towards development inside the city, redevelopment. So small changes are needed to reduce minimum size requirements and remove ambiguity regarding permitted modifications. Here are the proposed amendments. In 1612-010, we've updated language with no policy change for clarity. In 1612-030, we have reduced the minimum PRD size from 2.5 acres to 1.5 acres to allow greater flexibility for infill development. In 1612-040, we clarified that the burden of proof is on the applicant, clarified which permitted uses may not be modified, and removed an outdated reference to the streetscape element of the comprehensive plan. Next steps. So today is the public hearing and resolution to the City Council. And then we're shooting for adoption on November 4th at City Council. Any questions?
Okay. Seeing that there's no questions, we're going to open up the public hearing part. Anyone in the public or online can raise their hand and speak for 3 minutes. After that, we will then have discussion again by the commissioners to address any of the inquiries and then propose a resolution. Is there anyone online that wishes to speak? Seeing no one raise their hand to speak and no one in the audience raising their hands to speak, we'll move to discussions with the planning commissioners. Anyone have anything else they'd like to discuss?
Just wanted to confirm, for the record, we don't have any written comments, correct?
Correct.
Does someone want to propose to vote on the resolution that was included in our planning handbook? And they can read the motion that's on the screen.
I will make a motion to adopt the Planning Commission Resolution 2025-181, recommending adoption by the City Council of amendments to Mill Creek Municipal Code, Chapter 16, 1-2, updating regulations for the review of planned area developments.
Is there a second to this motion?
I second.
Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Next on our agenda is a briefing discussion on the critical area ordinance update. Turn that over to the city.
Okay, so before Justin begins, I just wanted to kind of step in and just kind of make some quick remarks. So the Department of Commerce and GMA requires us to regularly update our critical area ordinances. Part of the critical area ordinance this year has some incredibly complex policy requirements being proposed by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. I just wanted to note that I just kind of wanted to just take this opportunity to thank Justin for taking the lead on doing this work. We worked with some firm to help us do the gap analysis, but most of the code was developed by this gentleman here. I also kind of wanted to flag that some of the concepts that we'll be talking about in this discussion are tough, and literally every city right now is struggling with this right now. I was just today, I was at the Snohomish County Tomorrow Planning Committee, and during the final report out, every jurisdiction attending that meeting reported that they're also everyone's in the same phase pretty much of the critical area ordinance, and everyone is having issues with the same thing in terms of just kind of vague guidance from Department of Fish and Wildlife, or maybe more specific guidance. I know we have friends attending from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, but there's a lot of complex science going on here. So I just wanted to just kind of give you a caveat that there's a lot of stuff that's coming in on this, and that every city is working through this. And I think that the policies that we're recommending are going to be, one, good for our critical areas, and two, going to be good for development in the city. So with that further, go ahead, Justin.
All right, thanks, Jeff. So the agenda for this presentation will be a background of this critical area ordinance update, a review of the gap analysis, next steps, and discussion. So first, why do we have to update the critical areas ordinance? The Growth Management Act requires cities to update the critical area ordinances periodically. Mill Creek must review and update its critical area ordinance by the end of this year. And Mill Creek's critical area ordinance is found in chapters 1804 and chapter 1806 of the municipal code. So what's been done so far? The city hired an environmental consultant, Facet, to assist with the update. Facet helped prepare a best available science review and a gap analysis of our municipal code. And now staff is currently writing the municipal code amendments based on that best available science review and gap analysis. Next up, I'll go through the gap analysis and all of the changes necessary in our critical areas ordinance. And we'll be focusing on the most significant changes identified in the gap analysis and by staff. A complete list of every proposed ordinance, including all the minor ones, will be available in a staff report prior to next month's meeting. First up, Article 1, minor changes only. Great. Article 2, minor changes only. The good one. Article 3, we need to better define when redevelopment of non-conforming uses triggers conformance with environmental regulations. So say you have a building that's built in or next to a wetland that does not comply with the minimum buffer requirements. When does that building need to comply with minimum requirements with our ordinances? We need to better define what level of redevelopment would happen. For instance, we should need to define what could happen, say, if there is an existing impervious use, such as a parking lot. Is that allowed to be developed into a building, or does that need to be, reverted to a critical area buffer? This is going to be important when we develop South Town Center, because the North Creek wetland buffers go significantly into Town Center. This very building is in a critical area buffer right now. So we need to be very clear about how redevelopment should happen. Article 4, we need to update our exemptions and exceptions to require appropriate mitigation for public and private trails. Currently, trails are an exempt activity. You're allowed to build trails subject to certain restrictions in critical area buffers, and you do not have to currently mitigate for them. So we need to update our code to require mitigation, and only maintenance of trails will be an exempt activity. We also need to require a neighborhood land analysis for properties requesting a reasonable use exemption. A reasonable use exemption is when you are required, let's say a property is covered entirely by a critical area, maybe a wetland. You cannot deny the property owner the right to use that property reasonably. So for instance, let's say you have a residential zone and someone has a parcel, their parcel is completely covered wetland. You have to allow them to build at least one home on that property so they can have reasonable use of it. So we need to update the analysis that has to happen with that process. Articles 5 and 6, minor changes only. Now we're into the bigger changes. Article 9, wetlands. We need to update our table of required buffer widths based on revised ecology guidance using one of 3 options. Those options are, number 1, the most flexible option, determine buffers based on wetland category, intensity of proposed use, and special wetland characteristics. This is very similar to what we currently do. Option 2 is somewhat flexible. You base buffers on wetland categories and intensity of proposed use, but it does not allow buffer averaging or buffer reductions due to minimization measures. Option 3 is the least flexible. Buffers are determined solely on wetland category. It also does not allow buffer averaging or reductions. Here is what our current buffer widths are. You can see you have the wetland category on the left, category 1, 2, 3, or 4. 1 is the most important, 4 is the least important. And then you have habitat function scores that apply, and also the land use intensity. So here is option 1. So in option 1, there are 3 tables. Table 1 are the widths used if a proposal uses mitigation or uses minimization, and they use habitat corridors. So minimization would be, say, for instance, if you're going to have a parking lot and you have lights in the parking lot, they need to be pointed away from the wetland so it doesn't have light pollution in the wetland. or you have to find ways to minimize sound going into the wetland, or like stormwater runoff entering directly into wetland without being treated. Basically, you're minimizing impacts to the wetland. And habitat corridor is where you have a wetland, and nearby there is another critical area, for instance, a lake or a natural habitat, some critical area that's valuable for wildlife. Habitat corridor is a corridor between the wetland and the other critical area, provides a way for wildlife to pass between them safely. And those habitat corridors must be at least 100 feet wide. So you can see this chart. It is similar to what we have now, but not identical. It uses habitat scoring, category of wetland. If you do not include minimization measures, impact minimization measures, or a habitat corridor, you would have to comply with table 3. You can see this table is very similar, but all of the buffer widths are wider. For instance, on table 1 here, if you had a category 1 wetland with a 3 to 5 point habitat score, it'd be a 75-foot buffer. But in table 3, that 75-foot buffer goes up to 100 feet. And both these charts, or both these tables, are assuming a high intensity land use. Most urban land uses are high intensity. A low intensity use for something like bird watching or passive like fields for passive recreation. Something has very minor impacts. If you do happen to have a land use that is a low impact land use, we can reduce these buffers by 25%. Options 2 and 3 are much simpler, but they're also less flexible. So option 2, you can see there's the category of wetland, and then the buffers are based then on land uses with low, medium, or high impacts. But again, almost every use that'll be developed in Mill Creek is a high impact. So you can see these numbers are quite high. Category 1 and 2 are 300 feet. Whereas on option 1, a category 1 wetland could go down potentially to 75 feet even, based on the habitat score. Option 3 is the least flexible. It's based on the category of wetland only. Staff is proposing using option 1. It's similar to what we already have, and we think it's the best option to proceed. Any questions before we move on from this one?
Hey, Justin, so they just confirming, 'cause I remember us going through this exercise a couple years ago, right? With when we put together that table, that you were showing at the beginning. And I remember us having discussion about where the buffer averaging, how would that one apply again here to say option 1, right? Where there's a scenario where it's not, where there's a lot of movement around the edges of the wetlands, so it's not easy to make that determination on what that size is.
Yeah, great question. So you're right. We just did, we updated our buffers, wetland buffers a few years ago. I think it was 2022, and you're right. You're able to do buffer averaging with option 1, but not with option 2 or 3. And buffer averaging allows you to shrink buffers in one area if you expand them in another. So basically, as long as the average buffer is the same, you can move it around a little bit up to 25% of the buffer width. So if you had, let's say, a 100-foot buffer, you could shrink it down to 75 in one area if you increase it to 125 somewhere else, so that the total area buffer remains the same.
You had mentioned a few versions of low impact. What's the highest intensity low impact?
I don't know off the top of my head. I looked at the list a couple days ago, and it was, I don't want to misspeak. It was either a low, like like bird watching was actually one of the examples. I believe utilities are another. No, that's a medium. That's a moderate impact. I'll get back to you. I don't remember what all the impacts are.
Okay, thank you.
With option one and the flexibility, there, it seems like it's comes with complexity as well.
Mhm.
Is that time intensive? Like, what does it take to kind of weed through some of those details and come to
Yeah,
compliance?
yeah. It is more complicated, but a lot of that complication falls on the applicant per proposal because they have to show us how they comply with the rules. But because it's flexible, a lot of applicants they like the flexibility because even though it's a little more work for them, they're able to get better projects to pencil out. So it's a benefit to them and a benefit to us in many ways.
And should also be kind of reiterate that option one is pretty close to what we're already doing now. We're tweaking some of the numbers and stuff, and where some things are being modified, but it's essentially what we're already doing. So we're already pretty familiar with it.
I have two questions. One, when we talk about the habitat scoring, like where we go 1 through 3 up to 8, 9, which one is more natural like or the better habitat versus a more degraded habitat? Is it on the low end or the high end?
The high end, the greater number of points, means it's better habitat
Okay.
or it's better habitat or hosts a greater diversity of wildlife.
Okay, and then are these distances and stuff prescripted by the state that we have to implement them, or do we have any flexibility on any of them? How much of this is being proposed as prescriptive, like this is the only way we can adopt it versus we have some leeway?
Yeah, so we're required to base all of our regulations on the best available science. These tables are what the Department of Ecology has produced as the best available science. That's the recommendations. So you could, I mean, you could increase the buffer width without getting in trouble, but that also causes issues because, if the buffers are wider than they need to be, then you prevent a lot of things that are good for hemping in the city. If you go smaller, then you could try it, but you risk yourself, having the update challenged in court. And so we don't want to risk that ideally.
Anyone else have questions on this one topic?
Is option one also kind of a benchmark with other areas?
Yeah, it's what most cities adopt. All right.
I've got a question.
Mhm.
So I see these numbers, and are these feet or are these scores, averages? I just kind of want to understand how they work.
Yeah, great question. I guess I didn't type that in. Yeah, these are all based on feet. So the top left one here would be 75 feet, 110 feet, 225 feet. So that'd be this is the critical area or the wetland buffer. So you would say there's a wetland. This is how many feet past the edge of the wetland is protected.
So if I've got a piece of property,
Mhm.
that wetland could go, is it like from a water line and then in? Or it's from whatever, oh, well, here's a water line, but all this is critical.
Yeah, the press was saying I'm not I'm not an expert on wetland biology, but there's a number of factors that they use to determine where the edge of the wetland is. They look at like how much water accumulates, look at the soil types, they look at the plant types, and they use all these different factors to determine where the edges of those wetlands are. And when a development happens in a near wetland, we require a critical area report, and the applicant's required to get a have a certified biologist do that it's called delineation, where they define where the edge of the wetland is, and they give us a survey that shows that.
Okay.
And then these would be additions, the setback from that delineation.
Exactly.
Anyone else?
I do have one more.
Okay.
We've heard a number of times that applicants like to know what the rules are and that they like to have stability in that. Having the most flexible option doesn't sound like it would provide them with that kind of clear guidance and stability that we've been touting as primary in the past. So how do we lay that out? And then I have a follow-up question after that.
So I think the way to think about that is people like predictability. It's true. Until the answer is really bad. And then they're like, well, maybe I want a little flexibility from there. And I think that hopefully it's not too much of a cop-out answer, but if we're to think about like practical terms, right? Like if you were to apply just a blanket 300-foot buffer for something like that, then that would mean that if you have a property, like a single family house in your backyard is a creek, then that means anytime you want to do a modification to your deck, that's now a critical area alteration. And then you would have trigger all the environmental regulations going there to anything that goes on within that buffer. So practically speaking, for most of the city, that's kind of the big impact. So typically, yeah, predictability is something in there. And when you have flexible permits, it's not that it's not predictable. It's, you still have the buffers, but you have the ability to kind of, I guess, make things work versus, an inflexible system. I think in a lot of ways, building in the flexibility kind of allows more predictability to the case, kind of, because you can kind of fudge, you can get creative with it. If that makes any sense.
Okay, thank you. Another thing that you mentioned was that you had the meeting with other Snohomish, it was future cities, I don't remember what it was called, but and they were all kind of a very early stage and had not determined what they were going to do. But we've also heard that many are recommending going this way. Are we sure we're ready to make a recommendation if there is so much uncertainty about how this works?
So the uncertainty is regarding a buffer that we are yet to cover. And we will get, that's coming. But as far as the wetland buffers part, this is the one that's not as contentious in terms of how cities are adopting it. Some cities have already are going through their public hearings now for the critical area ordinance. Some are in the exploratory phase. I mean, everyone's on the same December deadline. But the one that, what I was saying is the one that people are working with is riparian buffers and not just the wetland buffers. And like I said, that we'll get into that can of worms in a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
I also want to follow up on your previous question about what a low impact use would be. And I found that list. Low impact uses are natural resource lands, such as forestry or cutting of trees only, open/recreational space with low intensity uses such as unpaved trails, hiking, bird watching, utility corridors without a maintenance road and little or no vegetation management, and cell towers. All right, so other changes to Article 9 wetlands are we need to require a no net loss of wetland functions for activities allowed in buffers, such as roadways or stormwater facilities. And we need to clearly identify mitigation sequencing, such as avoiding, minimization, or compensation, and mitigation hierarchy. For instance, which sort of mitigation, compensatory mitigation will be allowed in what order, such as mitigation bank credits or in lieu fee credits. We also need to clarify criteria for approving mitigation ratio reductions. Article 10, Fish and fish and wildlife habitat areas. We need to update stream, lake, pond, and riparian buffer widths to comply with the best available science. This is the one that the cities are having trouble deciding what to do. So our current regulations include set width buffers with 2 individual exceptions. So this first table here shows our current buffers. North Creek and Tambart Creek are specifically named as having 150-foot buffers. All other streams are 75 feet, lakes are 75 feet, and ponds are 50 feet.
And Justin, because, can you quickly go into what a riparian buffer is versus a normal, like a wetland buffer is? Like what makes riparian buffers different?
Yeah, so wetland buffer is the buffer around a wetland. A riparian buffer is the buffer around a stream or river. The Department of Natural Resources classifies streams using a water typing system where they base it on various characteristics, such as you have shorelines, you have fish-bearing streams, you have non-fish-bearing streams. In Mill Creek, almost every stream is classed as a fish-bearing stream, and we do not currently have any shorelines in the state. So this is what a lot of cities have used up till now for their riparian buffers. They use this water typing system. However, in 2020, the Department of Fish and Wildlife developed the best available science for protection of riparian areas. Their guidance emphasizes a framework shift away from stream buffers to what are called riparian management zones. And those riparian management zones are areas adjacent to rivers and streams that have the potential to provide full function, habitat preservation, pollution, reducing pollution, all these, the full function for the stream and the habitat. And they base the width of these zones on the site potential tree height. So what is site potential tree height? It is the average maximum height of the tallest dominant trees for a given site based on 200 years of growth. So basically, if you had a mature forest next to the stream or river, the dominant tree type, how high would that be? And then if that tree height is less than 100 feet, that site tree has less than 100 feet, they require a minimum of 100 feet. Here are some figures for Mill Creek. On the right is a map of the city with the site potential tree heights mapped. I know it's a little small, but the gist of it is the darker the shade of green, the higher the site potential tree height. Most of the city is at 196 feet, but there are some corridors that shrink down to about 100 feet, primarily North Creek. On the left is a chart that shows the difference in width between our current buffers and what would happen if we adopted site potential tree height. You can see there is about 2 on the far left, that -45. That's mostly North Creek. North Creek has a 150-foot buffer currently, but site potential tree height is only 105 feet. So it's about 45 feet less. It's about 2 miles of that stream in the city. Then we have about another 2 miles where the buffers would increase by around 27 feet. Another almost a mile where it increased by 30 feet. And then over 3 miles where it increased by 120 feet. That's primarily, so in Mill Creek, the rule of thumb would be North Creek, the buffers would shrink, but Penny Creek, Nickel Creek, all the other fish-bearing streams in the city, the buffers would increase from 75 feet to roughly 196 feet. Here's that explained again. So North Creek, currently 150, site potential tree height 105. Other streams currently 75. And then a subtle tree height is a range of 102 to 196 feet, but 196 is the most common width. So, implementation considerations. Few cities have adopted subtle tree height so far because few cities have done a critical area update since the guidance is released. And Fish and Wildlife provides site potential tree height polygon data. So basically, they calculate a subtle tree height for using these polygon shapes on the map. But there are gaps. They don't have polygons covering everywhere. You can see on this map, there's a couple white areas, white or gray, where there's gaps in the data. And then how would we implement this? There's a couple options we could go for. One would be to require a site potential tree height analysis with every development proposal. What that would mean is it's like a wetland delineation. So someone comes to us, they're developing near a stream, and we say, all right, we need to know what the site tree height is. You need to hire a biologist to analyze the site and create a report that tells us what that width should be. The good thing about this, the pro, is that it's easy to implement. We just say, have a biologist analyze a site, and that's what the width of your buffer is going to be. The downside is it adds complexity. Every site has to get a report. They have to produce it, and then we have to review it. So it adds a lot of time and complexity to the application process. The next option would be we explored with Facet possibly adopting a map using the Fish and Wildlife data. Where there are gaps, you would take gaps along the stream. You would take the adjacent polygon, whatever the highest is, you'd use that instead. This is our staff recommendation. It'll be better because it's be clear to people who want to develop what all of these subtle tree height buffers are. You just look at the map, that's what your buffer is. Another option would be to assign buffers similar to what we do now with a set width. So we would say 196 feet is the most common site tree height in the city. So that's going to be our standard. Every stream is 196 unless otherwise specified. And then we can look at streams like North Creek, where it's usually 105 feet, and say, because this stream is unique, and all streams are 196, but North Creek is 105. So you just say, here's a standard, and then certain named streams can be different if they are anomalies. And that's also like the map that provides a lot of clarity. It's very clear what the buffers are. You just have to look at the list. The last option would be to ignore site potential tree height and go with a stream typing option, as many cities did in the past. We do not recommend this one because it's not utilizing the best available silence from Fish and Wildlife. All right, that was really dry and complicated. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Benjamin?
So one thing I had, if we could go back to the map with the different tree heights, just so I can understand, this is like a class of tree, say a type of tree that's the dominant in the area, and that type of tree's typical highest height? Because 196 sure is very specific for everywhere.
Mhm.
And then 102 is also specific, but I see some 105s and 100s and 187s, but I don't know. I'm just trying to understand, is 196 a specific type of tree, or what is it that really supports?
Great question. I'm not 100% positive, but I believe the 186 has to do with Douglas firs being the most common tree type in most of the city. And where you see those lower numbers, like the 105 and 102, those tend to be where we have a lot of wetlands. And the tall trees don't grow well in the wetlands. It's mostly smaller trees like alders, cottonwood, stuff that grows along in wet areas. And those have much higher average heights than Douglas firs do.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have a similar kind of mapping if we were to adopt the wildlife ranges, fish and wildlife?
So yeah, so this map we see here. This is the one Facet developed this for us using the Fish and Wildlife data. So this is basically what the map would look like, very close to this. It would show. It would basically show. We'd have a GIS layer on the city's map system, and it would show. It would display what the buffer is using this information here. So like you'd have a, you look at North Creek and it would show, the map would show 105-foot buffer on each side.
Okay, so maybe I don't quite follow what the difference is between 1 and 2, the options for, yeah.
Yeah, so 1 is saying, we're not gonna, saying it puts the burden on the applicant to tell us what the acceptable tree height is. Whereas option 2 is saying, here's the data we have from Fish and Wildlife. This is what acceptable tree height is. You don't need to do an extra analysis to find out, do your own site analysis. We're just gonna use Fish and Wildlife's data that we have collected into this map.
So, quick question is, with these various heights, what does that mean? That, if you want to do a modification, if it's above a height, it's like, oh, it's okay. You can, chop that tree down because it's going to.
Yeah, great question. So the site potential tree height, they did a lot of, they've done a lot of research into how wide the buffer around streams and rivers should be. And they found that that site potential tree height is a good gauge for how wide those buffers should be. So they find that in areas that have 200-foot trees, to preserve the habitat and the pollution filtering functions you need around the rivers, 200 feet, the height of the trees is essentially how wide the buffer needs to be around the rivers and streams. I haven't dug that deep into why that is, but basically they found that the tree height correlates with how wide they need the buffers to be. It's a little odd to me that the height is equal to the the width, but yeah.
But practically speaking, though, is that if it's within that, if you're within 200 feet, if you're in that buffer, then it effectively becomes a critical area, correct?
Yes.
Which
Well,
means-
it's the critical area buffer.
It comes, it becomes, it would trigger critical area regulations, which would mean, like I kind of going back to that deck analogy, right? So if you got, that would mean that you want to do anything in your backyard, you want to do anything regarding that would require a critical area alteration permit. And that would also require a bunch of additional work. That's kind of what the practical implication of this is anything outside of that buffer, you're not in a critical area anymore. But so and this is the one where cities are struggling. Some cities, I think Anacortes tried getting away with not doing it, and they got sued, and now they have to do it. And they have a pretty intense implementation method. And so all the cities are, from what we've seen and from what we've heard, are looking at Anacortes and they're like, oh, we don't want what happened to them to happen to us. So everyone's looking at ways to implement this, but there's not really a consistent approach yet because we're all in the same process at the same time, basically. So that's why we are bringing forward proposals to discuss, and as we try to determine what the best way is what the best path forward is for Mill Creek.
I'm wondering if I add for this today, I wanted to ask a question kind of on the practical applications on the second bullet point, the staff recommendation. There was mention of, there's a couple of blank spots there in that previous slide map, right? So who would the burden fall on to if you wanted to build in those white spots on the map there? Is it on the applicant, or the city will then have to take on developing data for those missing locations?
So we would actually design the map to account for those gaps. So if there's a gap, you would look at the set tree height on either side of the gap, and whichever is higher, you would use that one. So if there's a gap and you've got 100 on one side and 150 on the other side, 150 would apply in that gap area along that stream.
I have a question. Can we propose potentially a hybrid of 1 and 2, wherein we have a default map, and that can be used unless the applicant chooses to do their own developed study, and that would remain the most flexibility for applicants if they choose to do a more detailed analysis than what I'm guessing this comes from, like LiDAR tree canopy analysis provides. If they really got into the specifics of their property, could we allow them that flexibility with the hybrid method between 1 and 2?
Yeah, we can absolutely do that.
I think that preserves flexibility the most for us, where we make it easy for those properties that want easy, but we give an opportunity for people who want to go chase down every little inch of their property, have that ability to do that.
Yeah, I think it's a great suggestion.
Thank you for suggesting that, because we even talked about that as like one of our options. Like, maybe it's too complicated. No, but I'm glad you brought that forward, because we had that exact same thought.
Yeah, and then I don't know if this is coming up in your presentation, but, and if it is, we can wait till we get there, about options if you are within that newly assigned buffer that we potentially would be adopting in the future. With respect to redevelopment or doing stuff on those properties, for options for mitigations or, offsets, and the availability of such mitigation options and offsets in and around our area, and potentially cost potentials.
Yeah, we don't, the percentages go into the specifics of that, but let me go to the map. So you can see there's streams kind of all over the city. But if you look, a lot of these, so this would, we actually had, if you look in the Cypress tree height memo that Facet gave us in the packet, they actually looked at which parcels would be impacted.
Yep.
And so that kind of gives us a map of what's impacted. But we do have, let's say you're a single family home and you're near one of the streams. There are exceptions for development. For instance, we allow other cities and Mill Creek, we do allow minor modifications. So let's say you have a single family home, you can expand either your home or building a deck or some sort of impervious surface. You're allowed to do a certain number of square feet of minor new construction in the area. That's allowed. But part of the gap analysis was showed that we need to be more specific about criteria for those and be more explicit, especially we're impacting more properties. We need to be really explicit about how that process happens. And that was one of the suggestions from Facet.
And then if we identify something in that gap, so let's say it's already developed today, and we adopt it, so then that wouldn't be normally allowed. What is grandfathered, and does that require replacement in kind? Or let's say someone had a deck that would fall out of even these exceptions today, could they replace in kind, or is that forbidden?
Yeah, you are currently allowed to, well, actually we had a bullet point from earlier. It was, we need to, where was that? Yeah, Article 3, we need to better define non-conforming use triggers for compliance. But the rule of thumb is you're allowed to, anything that was built prior to the regulations being implemented, it's allowed to continue as a non-conforming use. As long as you keep that use, you don't stop that use, you can continue as long as you want. So if you have a deck that's in the critical area, that's fine, as long as you don't destroy the deck for 10 years and want to rebuild it after 10 years. As long as you keep using the deck, that's fine. And they're limited. You can even expand it, usually it's like a one-time expansion. Let's say you have, your backyards in a critical area, you can add there's like a threshold for how many square feet of new disturbance you can cause as a one-time expansion. So anyone who already has something, no problem. And if you want a small thing, also no problem. It's only if you have a major change that would trigger this conformance.
Any other comments on this section?
Okay. Moving on. Okay, Article 12, geological hazardous areas. There are 4 updates we need to make to the critical area reports for this. We need to require geotechnical assessments to account for climate-related impacts, such as extreme precipitation or hydrologic changes caused by climate change. We need to require borings, test pits, or groundwater monitoring in areas that are prone to landslide or erosion. And also to the assessments, we need to add minimum static and seismic factors and assessment of cumulative impacts. All right, and now moving past the gap analysis, we have one staff proposal we are proposing. It's an optional thing. And it concerns SEPA exemption thresholds. So in the Washington Administrative Code, it outlines which types of constructions are exempt from SEPA. So if you apply to build a single family home, or up to 4 single family homes, really, you do not have to submit a SEPA checklist and go through the SEPA process. And that's the default. The default exemptions are up to 4 residential units or 4,000 square feet of commercial building. However, the WAC also includes a provision for flexible thresholds where cities can increase their exempted thresholds, but Mill Creek does not use this provision. If we look at this chart, we can see that, so on the left, the threshold category, these are the different categories of uses, and the max column shows the maximum exemption threshold allowed by state law. You can see every peer city except for Bothell has increased their exemption thresholds, and they've all increased it to the same numbers. And we are proposing to increase Mill Creek's exemption thresholds to match what our peers do. They typically have maxed out the thresholds for single family homes, agricultural buildings, commercial buildings, and parking stalls, but have not maxed out multifamily units. Staff is proposing matching the other cities, but if the Planning Commission wanted to increase to the maximum allowed by the state, we would also support that.
So this is regardless of any specific area plan, just straight up, if they wanted to do this, we could build like 100 single family units as long as they're below 1,500 square feet without going through environmental review.
Yeah, it exempts the SEPA review. It does not exempt them from our critical area requirements. So like you couldn't build these things in a critical area, but you wouldn't have to go through the SEPA process. Yeah, environmental review.
New here. What does SEPA stand for?
Yeah, it's the State Environmental Policy Act. Basically, when you, anytime someone wants to build something or a government wants to implement do a project or an action, you have to go through environmental review. And so you create, there's a standard SEPA checklist with a bunch of categories, such as, I don't remember off the top of my head, but you look at like transportation impacts and environmental impacts and all air and water and land. So all the different impacts that could caused by development, both on the environment and on the people around it. You have to review what all of those are and then the city makes a determination whether that the impacts are significant or not significant. And if they're significant, they have to mitigate it for in some way. So, for instance, transportation, you would have to usually pay an impact fee, or you know, there's many mitigations you can do, but that's part of the environmental review process. So the idea is you don't. It can be a pretty complex and costly process to go through, and so the idea with raising the threshold is for these smaller projects that are unlikely to have significant impacts. If you exempt them, you reduce a lot of the regulatory burden on things that are unlikely to be negatively impactful on the community.
An important note about the SEPA exemptions is that this wouldn't really impact the South Town Center project and initiative, because we're going through a planned action EIS, or planned actions ordinance for the South Town Center, which means we're kind of preloading all of the EIS and SEPA stuff before anyone even applies to develop. So we're pretty much knocking out all the SEPA for the South Town Center ahead of time. So any project that comes in doesn't have to do it. So just a quick heads up that, this would be more impactful for everywhere in the city except for South Town Center, because we're already doing all the environmental stuff for that upfront.
I guess I was gonna ask about that. I'm just from a practical perspective. I mean, look, even if we go to the 30, I'm trying to think of where in the world in Mill Creek you can build 30 single family homes that's not the sub area, right? I'm just not.
Yeah, for the single family homes, it'd be more impactful if we decide to annex into areas with still a lot of undeveloped property,
Okay.
which may be happening, but council's
Sure.
make a decision at some point in the near future. Yeah, for the single family homes, it's unlikely to apply. I'd say it's more likely to apply for the multifamily units that could still happen, say, in the EGov zone, or small commercial developments elsewhere in the city.
And I'm just curious, out of curiosity, so when it comes to the multifamily units, right, 200's, fairly decent size. I mean, how does that stack up? Like if you have, if I'm thinking like south of 164th, right, that's one of their potential areas, right, where there is a lot of land. If three different developers each build a 200, we never got a SEPA at all on that. We would never get a SEPA at all on that, right, if we went for the max.
They wouldn't go through environmental review. And one reason the city has not raised the thresholds in the past is because we were basing our impact fees on the SEPA process. So we would charge transportation mitigation, impact fees based on that SEPA environmental review process. But we are moving away from that. Our impact fees we're separating them away from the SEPA review process. So that's been one of the biggest holdups for the city. But now that we're separating these processes, it's not gonna reduce our impact fees that we get from development. So we'll still get transportation impact mitigation dollars we can use to improve roadways. So we'll still get our parks mitigation we can use to improve our parks. That's why we're doing it now as opposed to in the past.
So we're gonna have the separate impact fees more based on like the square footage or the dwelling units and stuff that affect traffic, park, schools, all of that stuff separate from that. Is there any threshold that would define that we want to do traffic studies? I mean, especially when you talk commercial, 30,000 square feet can be very little traffic to massive amounts of traffic, depending on what that commercial is. Is there any way that we could put in, a secondary threshold on the commercial side in particular, where you have to do a traffic study if your generations are above a certain threshold?
Yeah, so our public works team is actually developing our updated transportation impact fees now, and they want to base it on peak hour trips. So not on the square footage of the commercial area, but how many trips are generated.
Yeah.
I don't know if they'll have a threshold under which you don't have to pay. I don't know specifics of that.
Oh, so a question, if there was some sort of traffic study, I guess my question is, what does that traffic have to do with? Would that be like carbon emissions? Do we do studies based on what type of cars there are? Is like non-emitting, um, I guess, vehicles that would have no impact on the environment?
Yeah, good question. So, um, the so the transportation impact fees, it's less based on the carbon impact and more based on the impact to the roadways. So, say you want to build a new commercial building, that's going to generate more car trips in on the turning roadways, so more burden on the roads. So um, you pay basically the mitigation is used to pay for improvements to the road, so improving intersections or traffic flow in some way. Um, yeah, it's based on it's not on the environmental impact to like the air. It's on environmental impact to the traffic congestion essentially.
So SEPA here uses like the LOS standard instead of like a VMT standard still. Just to pay for traffic lights, wide roadings, adding a turn lane, things like that, versus an air quality or greenhouse gas section under SEPA would actually quantify the emissions, not just of the vehicles, but also the electricity, natural gas consumption and stuff. So those are separate areas, but the traffic fee would be more to pay for improving the road to make flow better, so you sit in traffic less. That makes sense?
Is it possible to like see like pros and cons to increasing these, like maybe seeing what Everett or Linwood or some of these other areas that have changed to these thresholds and what's happened as a result and benefits, negatives to that?
Yeah, we compare our pros and cons, and actually in the when you propose increasing these exemption thresholds, you in the ordinance you actually have to there's a couple things to prove. You have to show that it won't negatively impact like historic buildings and structures. It won't negatively impact. There's a couple different criteria you have to show. We haven't done that analysis yet. We're mostly proposing it to just match what our peers are, what their numbers are, but we can absolutely provide that.
I can tell you offhand, one of the advantages of doing this is about just, I guess it's about trying to improve the timelines for development projects and development initiatives and just kind of reduce complexity and increase kind of the ease of being able to invest in the city. Because I think one of the big issues with the SEPA and stuff like that is it can significantly add to your development timelines. It can add a lot of complexity and stuff like that. In other states, similar laws could sometimes be abused too, in terms of being able to destroy projects. But I think that's that's probably the biggest advantage of doing this is it just makes it kind of streamlines your development process a little bit.
Has Bothell just not come around to it yet? They haven't gotten to it yet, or have they decided to hold off on this?
That's a great question. We haven't dug into why Bothell hasn't done it yet. We haven't reached out to them yet. I actually put this chart together just this week, so I haven't had a chance to dig into it, but it could be that they're still basing their mitigation on SEPA instead of a different process like we had been, or it could, but I don't really know, I guess is the answer.
So over our history, how many developmental projects that have fallen between these two set numbers have shown an issue with the SEPA analysis? That it has been worthwhile for a SEPA analysis to have occurred?
I'm not aware of any, except the only mitigation that's occurred as a result of SEPA has been transportation mitigation for impact fees, which again we're moving away from the SEPA process. So I'm not aware of any developments where it would have made a difference. which is why I think cities set this threshold at the levels they are, because these are the levels at which it's probably going to result in a determination of non-significance or
Okay,
very
thank you. That was, but I think what I was trying to get to was that assessment. Could we actually go back 2 slides? I have one question about the seismic point there. Are there any, do we know, are there any parcels within the city of Mill Creek which would require borings, test pits, or groundwater monitoring because they are in an area of potential landslide or erosion?
I am not aware of any. There are very few geological hazardous areas in Mill Creek. The map has just a couple spots. I'm not very familiar with any of them specifically, but yeah, this is mostly just aligning our requirements with the best available science. It may be more significance again if we annex. There may be more areas in our MUGA where it could be more impactful.
Okay. My experience with coding, I don't want to get into dead code,
Mhm.
essentially. So that's what I was asking was, are there any, but yes, okay, understanding annexing could potentially add areas that we haven't seen in the past. Okay.
Yeah, that's sort of the big question mark around a lot of the changes is how future proof ourselves if we decide to grow into our MUGA.
I had a question on the changes to the minimum exemptions from SEPA. And does this consider that the caveat, if anything, is political or other overriding considerations? The city has the right to request that SEPA still be done despite it meeting these thresholds? Is that caveat planned to be in it?
Yeah, we have that caveat
Okay.
currently, and we would continue to have that.
And then have we thought about if there is certain prescriptive measures that would normally be kind of standard mitigation measures that typically get applied in SEPA documents that we'd want them to request, especially at the higher ends of these ranges as an alternative for exemption from SEPA? Or do we just want it straight, if you meet the square footage less than that, you do that? Or do we want to have like, if, at 10, it's fine, and then at, 50 to 100, you have to include these prescriptive measures, and then you're exempt from SEPA? Or are we not allowed to do that?
I mean, our proposal was for just a straight adoption like the other cities have
Mhm.
here. I think we would, I mean, especially for like multifamily, the maximum is 200 units, whereas most cities have only gone up to 60. I
Mhm.
think if we went higher than 60, we may consider something like that more. But I think at the level we're considering, we weren't going to require extra reports like that.
Okay. Anyone else?
All right, so next steps. So today we had the study session with Planning Commission. October 28th, we'll have a study session with City Council. Next Planning Commission meeting, we will come back for a public hearing and a resolution. And then we're looking for adoption December 9th by Council.
Timeline wise, you said that needed to be by December or the end of the year, and thus December was the target date.
December 31st, we did discuss with Facet, and they did say, worst case scenario, if you don't get done by December 31st, if you can show that you've made substantial progress, it's probably fine, but we prefer to get done by the 31st.
That's kind of the norm, right? Like if you were really trying, you don't immediately get fined.
Mhm.
Okay.
And we intend to transmit draft code language after the city council study session. And then hopefully we can just at least get the dialogue started with state reviewers so that, once we go through the public hearing and stuff like that, if there's any modifications, it's a lot easier to communicate and get the approval so we can still meet that deadline.
Yeah, if we got last minute guidance from Fish and Wildlife or DNI or Ecology, they wait till the last of the 60-day notification period, we might push the deadline back, but we're hoping to get it done by December.
I have one question, going back to the stuff in the wetland stuff with respects to restrictions on improvements to trails. So that would prohibit any new trails in any wetland areas, including the stuff by that Thomas Lake area that we may take on as a city park, and or the North Creek Trail plan to be implemented, which would be in these wetland areas. We would not be allowed to do those without, or could we still do, would have to do mitigation offsetting to establish those?
Yeah, it's a great question. So currently, in critical area buffers, you're allowed to build trails without any mitigation. There's an exception to the critical area rules. So this change would say you can still build them in the buffers, but you have to mitigate. So let's say you add, 10 feet of trail, maybe you extend the buffer another 10 feet to mitigate that trail going through. So it's not saying you can't do it, just to mitigate for the negative impacts that are caused.
Okay, and so besides buffer zone extension, what other examples of mitigation that would be feasible, and what's a typical cost to do those types of mitigations if we have to go into offsetting or alternative locations?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. One of the things we're clarifying is the mitigation sequencing and the hierarchies. So I can pull up the
Yeah, because you have something about you can pay into a state stuff, where the first two were funds kind of. Is there established projects available for these types of projects? And like, what's the cost per acre for these? Like, that would be prohibitive for the future extensions of the North Creek Trail, because the cost would be just overburdensome on things like that.
Yeah, good question. I don't know what the cost is for mitigation banks. I know we have a mitigation bank that we're able to use here in Snohomish County. But I don't know what the cost for credits are. Usually buying the bank credits is one of the last options you would use. So I'm gonna pull up the sequencing.
We looked it up, and this is one of the things where it's the state requiring us to adopt these changes about mitigating, about the trail.
Yeah, but as we're adopting it, we should know the impacts to this, and if they're going to be basically ruling out those types of projects that our city desires to move forward because of either feasibility or cost infeasibility. We should go with open arms, especially with those two particular ones. Like, we do have a grant to do stuff on the North Creek Trail. And if that suddenly we don't have funds to do that because it's now cost prohibitive, we should be aware of it.
Unfortunately, that is the theme of the decade, is everything is just getting more expensive every day.
And
Yeah.
maybe just to kind of make sure I understood correctly, kind of the conversation here. So if you're repairing a trail, this still applies, like it's still we still have to make the new standards. It's not like we can just follow under
Yeah.
old standards for just
Yeah, so
even just plain repairs.
Yeah, if you have an existing trail, you can maintain that trail, maintain, rebuild. That's fine. It only apply if you're introducing new trails. So for the mitigation sequence, basically you have there's the order it's supposed to go in is pull it up. You're supposed to first avoid impacts altogether, so that's not possible. Minimize impacts by limiting the degree or magnitude. Then you rectify impacts to wetlands by repairing, rehabilitating, or restoring the affected environment. For instance, if you had let's say you had a critical area that the vegetation is severely degraded and you're building a trail through there, your mitigation could be restoring the degraded vegetation.
So
to
we can
native.
go from like a level 1 habitat and restore it up to a level 3 and we get credit for that, for this, the take that we take for the trail.
Right,
So
exactly.
just, like planting, ripping out invasive species and planting native species would be a potential lower cost mitigation that would be open for these types of projects.
Yeah, yeah. And so of the 6 sequences, actually like buying mitigation made credits, that'd be like step 5.
Okay.
So that's near the bottom. And if you do want to, what's the word? Mitigate, the sequence for that is first mitigation made credits, then in lieu fee program credits. We don't have any in lieu fee programs currently, but we could in the future. And then there's a couple of steps, but yeah, so basically we can still do the trails. We just have to be aware of the impacts and have appropriate mitigation to account for them.
And right now, we don't have any existing programs that we would want money for that we can just get the developers or the people doing the trails to put into a bank to do the projects. We don't have a list of projects within our city yet.
Right.
Do we
Correct.
plan to create one or not really on the agenda for the city?
Not on the agenda, but if it becomes a significant enough issue, we could explore that. One of the suggestions FASA had was to allow for in lieu fee programs, so we could allow that if we ever want to institute a program later.
And also I'll note, next year, we are fixing to do the Parks and Recreation Open Space Plan, the PROS plan.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this dialogue would be perfect for that process of being able to kind of, think through the impacts of these updated state rules and kind of how we're gonna pay for and expand and improve our existing trail infrastructure and park infrastructure.
Okay, and that's scheduled for next year?
Yeah, that's on
Okay.
we're hoping to do that next year, correct?
Anyone else? Okay, nothing more on your guys' agenda? Okay, anyone want to speak for the good of the order? Yep.
I do have one thing. I've been trying to do this every time I speak at a public meeting. I'd like to remind anyone from the public who's listening and also to you planning commissioners, the EIS scoping for the Southtown Center is still open. The point of the EIS scoping process is for the public and anyone to identify issues that they would like for us to study as potential environmental impacts for the Southtown Center. The EIS, so during this process, until October 28th, we are receiving comments for things you'd like for us to study. If you have issues like, hey, I want you to worry about parking. I want you to look at parking. We're concerned about aesthetics. We're concerned about some rare moth that lives up here. I don't know. Whatever you're interested in having studied, you can provide comments to the city until October 28th is our deadline. The way that you can provide comment is you can go to our website, millcreekwa.gov/STC, and leave a comment there. Or you can email Mr. Horn, justin.horn@millcreekwa.gov, or you can send a mail and send him, if you want to be old fashioned, you can just write a letter addressed to Mr. Horn at the City Hall address. Again, October 28th is the deadline, and we just invite anyone who is interested that we are still receiving comment. Thank you.
And I have one more item to
Yep.
the order. If you recall, at the August Planning Commission meeting, we did the volunteer board workshop for Southtown Center. We were originally planning on having the next workshop coincide with the Planning Commission meeting. However, our next agenda for November is looking pretty full, so I think we're gonna move it to a different day, probably the Wednesday before the next Planning Commission meeting. So if you were interested in attending the next workshop number 2, we encourage you to come. You should be getting an email in the next week or so with the exact date and time and ways to participate. So we encourage everyone to show up. We got great feedback last time, and we're looking forward to seeing what you think of our draft plan.
And then I have one last thing. Thanks. Just a quick update. Very exciting. The DRCC project, the RFQ deadline closed October 13. We received we received 8 bids, and so we're in the process with our selection committee to go through the different bids, and hopefully we'll have a firm selected by early November, and the long-awaited DRCC project can get back underway. So I just wanted to give everyone the good news. Thank you.
Okay, and what's the date of our next planning commission? So everyone can mark.
November
their calendar.
20th.
November 20th. Anything else for the good of the order? Can I get a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
I'll second that motion.
all in favor?
Aye.
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 Meeting adjourned. Thank you.